and welcome to my talk, Lute Pedagogy in the 21st Century, a new tutor for the Renaissance lute based on historical sources and modern research. Teaching the Renaissance lute in the 21st century is like following a treacherous path filled with pitfalls and unseen cliffs. Even more treacherous is writing a method book, for the written word can be seen as authoritative, whereas it is often speculative, based on experiences which are constantly changing and beliefs that are being re-evaluated. We are attempting to bring a tradition into the modern era that was veiled in secrecy, hinted at in treatises, and primarily passed on from teacher to student, if at all. Thomas Mace, in Music's Monument from 1676, claims that the lute's reputation for being very difficult to play is to a large degree because of the closeness of masters in the art, who all along have been extreme shy in revealing the occult and hidden secrets of the lute. He adds, "Nor was there, nor yet is there, anything more consistently to be observed among masters than to be very sparing in their communications concerning openness, plainness, and freeness, either with parting with their lessons or imparting much of their skill to their scholars, more than to show them the ordinary way how to play such and such lessons. The masters die, and all their skill and experience dies with them." Mace then goes into great detail regarding learning the 17th century instrument in a manner foreshadowing modern pedagogy. Since there are no 16th century lute methods which truly take us through the process of learning the instrument, on what, you may ask, have I based my method? This will be the subject of my talk. In addition to my lute instructors, my greatest teachers have been the instrument itself, the music, the people I play with, my students, and of course the writings of past masters, no matter how obscure their words might be. Ideally, a lutenist will combine the attributes of artists from many other fields. She must be an athlete, a dancer, a rhetorician, a poet, a scholar, an actor, and an entertainer. She must have an inner vision of the music that simultaneously contains variety of timbre, dynamic tempo, articulation, and phrasing, and project these through the instrument with grace and passion. She must be able to inspire the listeners to dance, to cry, to laugh, to sing, and above all, she must be able to communicate the passions intrinsic to the music. So, how can these lofty goals be approached on the Renaissance lute, particularly given the lack of detailed instructions from the 16th century? Let us first turn to Silvestro Ganassi, whose method books are primarily for viola da gamba and secondarily for the lute. He writes in his prologue to the 1542 Regula Rubertina, "You must know, dear readers, that every faculty is a combination of beauty with quality. The beauty conveyed by the musician is seen in the manner of holding his instrument with grace, with the carriage of his hands and in the movements of his body, executed with such symmetry as to inspire the audience to maintain silence. This appearance contributes to the quality of performance, which not only provides nourishment to the ear, but also visual beauty. If beauty is perceived in the manner of holding the instrument and in motions which are harmonious, quality also will be perceived through the performer's knowledge of intervals and harmonies allowed by the musical structure, and with diminutions or passaggi played in such a manner as will not offend the art. That is so to say, played without committing forbidden errors of misunderstanding, of counterpoint and composition." Ganassi goes on to instruct the player in various essential aspects, including method of holding the viol, on the movement of the body, factors which enrich the quality of performance, method of using the bow, the way to use the arm and hand, and so on. My method is based on this and other writings for 16th century instruments, hints in 16th and 17th century lute treatises, general music priorities and practices from the time, such as counterpoint and singing, as well as modern research into physiology, psychology, learning processes, neurology, and philosophy. From the introduction to my tutor. This book is intended as an intensive course for teenage and adult beginners on the lute, with or without experience on the classical guitar, as a self-tutor or with a teacher, as well as for experienced lutenists who wish to reevaluate their technique and musical approach. As a prerequisite, I assume basic knowledge of modern music notation and rudimentary sight singing ability. As I write in To the Reader, magic, that's what it's all about. We all have the gift of magic. It's only a question of awareness, cultivation, and allowing it to permeate our playing. Orpheus was reputed to have had the magical ability to soothe savage beasts with his playing of the lyre. The magic of Francesco da Milano is well documented. He sits down to play at a banquet and, as if tuning his strings, begins to seek out a fantasia. According to the witness, the guests become silent and are deprived of all senses save that of hearing and transported into a kind of divine frenzy. How did Francesco get to this point? Surely he was supremely gifted, but such talent is not necessary to share the gift of magic. Magic is about creating illusion in a deep place that doesn't differentiate between real and imagined experiences. It's about conviction that we are inspired by inner as well as outer forces, conviction that our vibrating strings can move the passions of others, conviction that we can create the illusion of speaking and singing on a plucked instrument. As is the case with any gift, however, we need to devote ourselves to its development. In order to play the lute in a free, communicative, and magical manner, regardless of our level, we must be as masterful of our movements as an athlete or acrobat. We must be as expressive and subtle as a singer or dancer, and develop the physical capabilities necessary to realize our musical imagery. We must be focused like a Zen archer or a brain surgeon. We must be as passionate as a contemporary singer-songwriter or improviser and make the music truly our own. One doesn't need a high-level technique to make magic. Some of the most magical performers have been amateur musicians or children in the beginning stages. How is this achieved on the Renaissance lute? Through an approach that starts with freedom of movement and cultivates an imagination inspired by the musical spirit of the 16th and 17th centuries. We must truly listen and immerse ourselves in a style so completely that we come closer to listening the way the old masters did. Not an easy task, but one which can enrich our lives as well as our performing abilities. I will now go through some of the sections and chapters of my book to demonstrate how this ambitious goal can be approached. Section 1 of my book is called Background Material. This is, for me, fundamental information which provides the historical context for the music to be played, including a discussion of historically inspired performance with subjects such as the improvisatory tradition, repertoire and tablatures, rhetoric as a guiding principle, phrasing, articulation, punctuation, emphasis, consonance and dissonance, rhythmic inequality, tempo modification, and passage work. This section is not directly related to the physical process of learning the instrument, but contains important contextual information for the learner to absorb in preparation for playing the music. My hope is that this section encourages the player to recognize the primacy of rhetoric and develop the technique to realize it on the instrument. From my tutor regarding rhetorical playing. Ganassi in 1542 encourages musicians to emulate the art of the orator. He writes, "What I have suggested is as desirable and useful to the musician as a bold address and lively gestures are to the orator, who will sometimes imitate laughter or weeping or other expressions of emotion as the speech demands. When you are playing music, you should always reflect the meaning of the words in every possible way." Ganassi had already pointed out in 1535 that only will you play a melody artistically when by the variety of your expression you are able to imitate the human voice. Your expression should vary from the most tender to the most lively, and he encourages players to learn the dexterity needed for extremes of expression. I then write about phrasing, articulation, punctuation, and emphasis. In the 16th century, instrumental playing became more directly linked to the arts of oratory and singing. In speech and song, articulation was an essential rhetorical tool associated with separating and connecting words and phrases, and its subtle use also played an important role in interpreting instrumental music. Emphasis brings out the important notes in a phrase without necessarily making them louder than the others. One might say it involves accentuating a word without accenting it. Indeed, one might emphasize a note by playing it softer, like intense whispering, or simply by lengthening the value of the note. The amount of accentuation a given note receives always depends on its context. In poetry, a two-syllable word emphasized on the first syllable is called a trochee, and one emphasizing the second syllable is called an iamb. The first note was frequently called the good one, the second the bad one, as in Il Transilvano by De Ruyter in 1593, who calls the notes either buona or cattiva. Renaissance lute technique supported this natural dynamic. The thumb was used for good notes, the index finger for bad ones. If a good note was accompanied by a bass, the middle finger was used instead of the thumb. In the 17th century, thumb-index alternation in melodic passages and diminutions was largely replaced by middle-index alternation. Regarding wind instruments, for example the recorder, Ganassi recommends speaking syllables into the instrument while playing and divides them into soft, lere, moderate, tere, and hard, teke. Although we can't exactly imitate this expressive use of syllables on plucked instruments, I find it useful when playing two-note groups to imagine a trochee. It is also valuable to search for different timbres and articulations by varying the flexibility of the finger joints. The main strength of the finger stroke originates in the bass joint, the finger joint closest to the wrist, whereas articulation and tone color can be influenced by varying the firmness of the tip joint. Allowing it to stay completely supple, like the end of a paintbrush, produces a sound close to lere. A moderate degree of firmness produces a sound close to tere, and complete firmness, perhaps even actively plucking with it, produces a sound close to teke. These subtleties can help us emulate a vocal rhetorical style of instrumental playing. The next section in my tutor is called An Introduction to Anatomy and Biomechanics, with chapters on exploring movement of the tendons, bones, joints, and muscles. From section 2 of my tutor, An Exploration of Movement. There are various definitions of good technique. I would say that technique is the great enabler and define good technique as the ability to realize that which is in our musical imagination at any given moment. For this, optimizing body use is essential. Being aware of posture is a vital first step in learning to play an instrument. Thomas Robinson, for example, writes, "First sitting upright with your body, lean the edge of the lute against the table." Only when good posture is had both in memory and practice does Robinson begin with instructions for playing. Thomas Mace, instructing the beginner, says, "The first thing I would have you regard is your posture. In other words, how to sit and hold your lute. For the good posture has two commodities depending upon it. The first is, it is comely, credible, and praiseworthy. The second is, it is advantageous as to good performance, which upon your trial you will soon perceive, although many do not mind it. Now, as to this order, first let yourself down against a table in as becoming a posture as you would choose to do for your best reputation." And consistent with other sources on performance practice, and in language similar to sprezzatura as described in Castiglione's Il Cortegiano from 1528, Robinson suggests that students do the first lesson by not striving at it, but with such ease as if you did it carelessly. And he also writes, "True art maketh hard things easy." As we shall see, this becomes a central theme in my tutor, and I explore these ideas more fully in the chapter called The Tao of Sprezzatura. The main goals of this exploration are freedom of movement and efficiency of movement. From my tutor: what then is efficiency of movement? It involves using only the necessary muscles and needed contraction for the intended movement. This relates to the concept of relaxation, an important concept that is often misunderstood and misused. It is certainly important to play in a relaxed manner, but this only applies to muscles not necessary for the desired movement. Using muscles that are unnecessary for the intended movement could be characterized as playing in a tense manner. Some people naturally use the muscles properly and efficiently. Most people, however, benefit from knowledge and training. Playing the lute well depends on the efficient use of bones and muscles, for which exploration of anatomy is useful. The emphasis is on using natural movements whenever possible as basis for our trained movements. Awareness of the joints and their function helps us play in an efficient manner. In addition to feeding the brain with information, body awareness through disciplines such as the Alexander technique and Feldenkrais method can be useful. I then go into a detailed explanation of the flexors, extensors, joints, bones, and muscles. For example, on page 35, I show some of the finger flexors. An example of how this understanding can help us. The wrist is flexed by some of the same finger flexors that flex the middle joints of the fingers. So if we play with an overflexed wrist, it hinders the finger flexion because these flexors are already in use. This leads to less flexibility and often to pain. It is therefore best to play with a wrist that is either straight or only slightly bent. Some chords will require a seriously flexed wrist, but this should be the exception. From my book regarding muscles. One of the primary causes of reduced flexibility or pain is compensation due to the incorrect use of muscles. Since using the wrong muscles, or muscles incorrectly reduces the efficiency of our action, we compensate by using muscles that are less suitable, leading to excess tension, fatigue, and associated problems. To play in a healthy, efficient manner conducive to free musical expression, we need to use the weight of the arm and hand wherever possible, as well as large muscles for strength and small muscles for delicate movement. Feeling pain in any part of the body when playing requires looking for the source of the problem. In other words, pain in the fingers may be traceable to bad posture due to incorrect back muscle support. One of the most important realizations in my studies is that in playing the lute, the fingers don't actively move, but rather are moved. In other words, no muscles on the fingers are involved in movement. The fingers are moved like levers by the extrinsic muscles in the arm and intrinsic muscles in the hand. This insight strengthens the conviction that any tension felt in the fingers only serves to inhibit their motion. Muscle fibers can contract and relax only. Movement caused by muscle contraction, like raising the arm towards the sky, can be called active movement, whereas movement caused by relaxing said muscles, like allowing the weight of the arm to drop to your side, can be called passive movement. An alternation of active and passive movement greatly increases our endurance and productivity. This is an essential concept for athletes and dancers and will be integrated into our work. The next section is entitled Preparing to Play, which includes chapters on practicing, making the difficult feel easy, mental imagery and processing, the brain, motor performance, learning, and mental training. The following section is called Tuning and Holding the Lute, Right Hand Exercises. The primary focus here is on developing a position and body use optimizing freedom and efficiency of movement. For freedom of movement, support from larger muscles is essential. Efficiency of movement is based on only making the movement necessary to achieve the desired sound and expression. I then begin with one-voice exercises and music. Although we don't have lute tutors from the 16th century that show this in detail, I feel that it's best to start with focus on melodic playing before putting multiple voices together. From my tutor. Before playing, we start by observing the right hand. Slowly flex all the fingers from the middle joints. Notice the point at which the base joints naturally begin to flex. Notice at what point the tip joints begin to flex. Relax these muscles. The fingers should return to their starting positions without effort. This is the natural response to relaxing the flexor muscles and is important after plucking the strings. Learn the difference between relaxing the flexors, allowing the fingers to return to their natural starting position, and activating the extensors, involving active muscle contraction, for it is an essential difference for efficient and balanced playing. It is also essential for endurance, for if we are constantly flexing and extending the muscles, they have no rest intervals. If we, however, flex and release, there is a continuous interplay between contraction and relaxation. From the chapter Holding the Lute. I recommend using a strap, which I think is the best solution. Crossing the legs and using a footstool both cause a tilt in the pelvic region, causing an imbalance in the body which can lead to pain and faulty use. Leaning the lute against a table, as is often recommended in early writings, is also an excellent way of supporting the lute, but less practical for the traveling lutenist. Similarly to Robinson, Mace writes, "And now, supposing you are perfect in your postures, proceed to the striking of a string." Here are figures 47A to D, which show the index finger stroke in 4 stages. From my tutor regarding plucking the strings. Start training your body right away to connect movement to your musical imagination. In other words, from the beginning, connect your musical imagination to your kinesthetic imagination. In all the exercises and pieces, have a mental image, including volume and timbre, of the desired note. Let your mental imagery drive the movements. Listen and experience the sound and sensation fully. Reflect on whether the result has met your mental image and make adjustments if necessary. For this purpose, I present not only tablature, but also normal notation. Since lute tablature tells the players where to place the fingers, a learner's tendency could be to focus on that aspect rather than on the actual music that's being produced. Normal notation helps us develop a clearer concept of phrasing and expression. In the first exercise on open strings, I already integrate a 2-syllable word into the equation. Here is exercise 10, thumb index alternation with syllables. From my tutor. The heavy light articulation described above can be helped by imagining a 2-syllable word with slight emphasis on the first syllable. For example, bella. This is a good word to imagine, an Italian word meaning beautiful, because the first syllable starts with a medium hard consonant, and the second syllable starts with a soft consonant. Thus begins our quest to play in a singing manner. There is no better way than imagining an accompanying text. I also feel that it's important to integrate dynamics into playing as soon as possible, even though they were rarely indicated in 16th century lute tablature. The descriptions of instrumental playing from the time are convincing that dynamics were used for expressive purposes. You will be well served by doing the exercises in this book with musical gestures, avoiding playing them in a mechanical, unmusical manner, for we are training a technique that serves the musical imagination, not vice versa. I then move on to left-hand exercises and pieces. Vincenzo Capirola speaks of the necessity of small movements of the left-hand fingers. In the Capirola lute book of 1517, it is written, "When you play, keep your fingers close to the fingerboard and do not keep them too far away from the strings. This is very important. Try to acquire this habit from the beginning. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to change it later." Mace gives similar advice, writing that when you remove a finger from the string, let it be so very little from the string as one can scarce perceive your finger to have unstopped it, which custom will teach you to play close and quick, neat and fine. But if, on the contrary, at the first, you use yourself to lift or toss your fingers high, as too many use to do, you shall never play handsomely, quick, or well. This is great advice, but quite difficult to achieve without tensing the hand in a manner that inhibits movement. They give us the what, but not the how. To help in this endeavor, I explore the world of muscles in a subsequent chapter. I then give melodic fragments with text, as shown here, Fortune my foe, and later Go from my window, first without and then with dynamic markings. I feel that using written or imagined text is essential for learning the subtleties of expressive playing, for we are much more likely to play a melodic line with nuance if there is a sample text. This leads to a complete melody, for example, Go from my window, without, then with dynamic markings. However, to guard against a typical problem of musical tension being accompanied by physical tension, I write, please note that playing with musical intensity need not result in increased physical tension. Keeping your body well balanced and allowing it to follow the musical imagination will aid in this endeavor. At the conclusion of each section, I suggest that the reader consult readily available facsimile and modern editions for additional pieces if they don't feel ready to continue to the next level of difficulty. Before moving on to two-voice music, I present information on grace notes. I then approach two-voice music, beginning with simple melodies accompanied by a supportive bass, before presenting contrapuntal music. The same preparatory process is used, exercises isolating and describing specific movements and pieces that include real or made-up texts. A common feature of my book is reusing melodic material in more complex, multi-voice versions. I then introduce more difficult music in modern tablature as well as in facsimile. To prepare the student for polyphony, I present the hexachord system and its possible implications for instrumental play. And in order to make a direct connection between vocal polyphony and multi-voice playing on the lute, I take a fantasy by Francesco da Milano and break its voices into separate lines. Later, I introduce the 10-course lute from the chapter Right-Hand Technique in Transition. From the mid-16th until the early 17th century, a transition took place in which the angle of the right forearm and hand to the strings began to approach 90 degrees. This facilitated a playing technique in which the thumb stays out from under the fingers during and after its stroke. Thumb out. By the 1620s, most lutenists were using thumb out technique, placing the little finger close to the bridge. The higher string tension near the bridge results in a clear sound with prominent upper partials, as well as a solid bass sound, allowing a larger range of dynamics than does playing close to the rose. Playing closer to the rose with a hand more parallel to the strings was no longer attractive, and thumb under technique dropped out of use until the 1970s. An additional advantage to playing closer to the bridge is that it more clearly reflects the consonance-oriented rhetorical singing of the 17th century. Playing Baroque music close to the lute rose is like singing with more focus on the vowels, a vocal technique that developed later in the 19th century. Here is figure 65A, which shows Nicolas Vallé's right-hand position as represented in 1620. There is then a supplement for learning the archlute, but its discussion is beyond the scope of this paper. Since I know it's quite difficult to learn to play an instrument from a book, I am slowly making videos to illustrate certain points. These can be found on my YouTube channel. And from the coda of my book. For the last 30 years or so, one of the most important aspects of my teaching has been the individualization of the lessons I give. Every student has unique strengths and weaknesses, and my challenge is to meet them where they are and help guide them to a new place. Every lesson is full of the unknown, and spontaneity is the only way to deal with a changing environment. In this tutor, however, I have created an immovable object. Unlike a book in the Harry Potter saga, it will not respond to your personal needs, nor interact with you as you journey through its pages. The individualization has been up to you, and I hope you could make it your own by absorbing what is meaningful for you, ignoring what is not, and recognizing this book for what it is, a dim light illuminating a path into the treacherous but highly rewarding process of becoming a musician. In your search for excellence on the lute, remember that it is precisely our own imperfections and unique human qualities that can touch the hearts of listeners. And through the magical art of performing Renaissance and Baroque music, we are given an ideal vehicle to achieve this worthy goal. Ideally, with this work, the conceptual boundaries between mind and body disappear, for they are essentially different expressions of our totality. The perceived boundaries between technique and interpretation disappear, replaced by realization of how our musical imagination can be manifested through optimal body use. The artificial boundaries between composition and improvisation, between player and instrument, between music maker and music receiver also disappear, and music becomes a magical experience for all, unspoken and intangible. A calm center can give access to our deep feelings, just as physical or emotional agitation can block them. Being more connected with our core feelings can connect us to the core feelings of others. This, in my view, is what rhetorical performance is all about. We may call this experience what we like. We may try to define the undefinable. But I again turn to Thomas Mace for the final word. And I am subject to believe, if in eternity we shall make use of any language, or shall not understand one another by some more spiritual conveyances or intuitions of perceptions than by verbal language, that music itself may be that eternal and celestial language.